Our next speaker is Dr. Sally Brown, who is a research associate professor at the University of Washington. And she's going to talk about a match made in heaven, compost and urban agriculture. Sally's another urban soil scientist that I've known for many, many years and have really enjoyed working with her. And so very glad that she was able to make it for this symposium. Sally's interested in soil because I am interested in soil because I like to eat. So I concur. You could take it away, Sally.
So all this talk about urban soils, I want to say that the big group that hasn't been represented here are the urban asset managers. And those are your wastewater treatment people and your solid waste people, because those are both fundamentals for soil building. And so I am here as a professor, but I'm also here as a representative of your organic sources that are present in every area. And it really comes together when you talk about community gardens. Here you can see I got certain of the age groups. I may be missing the 35 to 50-year-old group in the examples here, but there you go. Next slide, please. One thing that you read about in the literature now is the importance of a circular economy. And when you're talking about urban residuals, urban organic residuals, and urban agriculture, you're talking about the potential to have a perfect circle. But too often in most of the cities in the US, what you get is a line instead of a circle. I am not alone in my fondness for eating. Not everybody may like carrots quite as much as this kid. He is certainly going to have any Bugs Bunny he knows very, very happy. But you take those carrots and how do you get them? Here are your resources. Wastewater, the solids from wastewater, biosolids are very regulated, Rich. The biosolids in Baltimore were not contaminated. That was a perception problem, not anything else. Food scraps, yard waste, and cardboard. In California, your food waste composting, your vegetable composting, your yard debris composting, it's all regulated. The compost itself is regulated and the process is regulated. Same with the biosolids. So this is one way that you can get a material that is highly consistent, highly regulated, and that otherwise could be put to waste. And if you want to see the damage that putting this goes to waste, we can go to the next slide. Landfills are where many of these materials end up. And you talk about the benefits of soil carbon storage. Soil carbon storage is fabulous, but it's dwarfed when you look at the methane potential when you put your food scraps in a landfill. It's about 1 ton for each wet ton of CO2. I mean, 1 ton of CO2 equivalent for each ton of food scraps that you put in. And that's because food scraps, as you know from the back corner of your refrigerator, decay really rapidly and they make methane. And landfills are really not very good at capturing it. So next one. Okay, if you take that compost or those feedstocks instead and put them in a compost facility, it can be a neighborhood, your backyard, it can be an industrial facility or a commercial facility like you see in the picture here, you can detect some level of methane, but it's tiny. Instead of 1 ton, EPA gives a default value of about 0.05 tons. So a 20th, you reduce methane emissions by 20-fold, not 20-fold, it's a very large reduction in the methane that's emitted. And plus you get compost. And compost is a glorious, wonderful thing. And once you start looking at the potential uses of compost, particularly in an urban area, instead of a landfill dead end with a ton of CO2 for each ton of food scraps, you get a circle and never-ending possibilities. These are all pictures from community gardens and compost-related activities across Washington State, in Seattle primarily. Next. Okay. Let's say you take that compost and you use it in an urban agriculture for an urban farm. There are the associated carbon benefits for soil carbon sequestration. There's the landfill avoidance benefits. There's the fertilizer avoidance benefits. Those are just the carbon benefits. And if you go on, if you look in the literature, and here I'm giving you big headlines. You guys, this is California based. This is LA based. There's a lot of work. There was just a big paper out of Davis that the only way, forget no-till, forget cover crops, the way that you had carbon storage in soils, if you took into account the full depth of the soil down to a meter, was when you added compost with those cover crops. And the amount of carbon stored was very, very impressive. Another California specific slide next. Marin Carbon is a lovely project. It's a little to the north, I'll grant you that, but what they've done is take animal waste and they've expanded there and are looking at different other types of materials. And instead of having it in the lagoon, they composted it and applied it to degraded rangeland. Saw very, very high rates of carbon storage. One of the other things is when you start fixing the soil, you get bigger plants, you get luxurious growth, you get a wonderful cascading range of benefits. Now, if you go one more, I've even seen this in Washington State. We did a big survey of sites, including right away on highways, orchards, lawns. This is dryland wheat in the picture here. Long-term application of biosolids and compost, and in all cases, we measured total carbon stored and saw big increases as a result of putting biosolids or compost on the ground. Realize also, I'm going to still talk, but I'm going to get to this slide in a second, that when you do that, okay, putting these materials on the ground, making them into compost or making them into soil amendments, it not only saves carbon or gives you carbon credits, it's also super cost effective for the cities that have to manage these materials. So it's like winning all around. It's like a gift from the gods. It's like Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan in that movie. Anyway, now I'm ready for the next one. Another bit of work. We did a sample, practical sampling for what was then the Solid Waste Authority in California to see if using compost really made a difference. And you have great legislation coming that's going to force all these organics out of landfills. So get ready to accept them and enjoy them. We sampled farms up and down the state and looked at changes in soil with compost addition compared to what happens when you just put fertilizer down. You get more carbon, you get more microbial activity. So talk about life in soil, which Rich talked about earlier. We heard all about water holding and the importance of water holding capacity and the propensity of soils under climate change to lose that macro pore space. You increase water infiltration rate and you also increase water holding capacity. So you improve soils in general, and part of that is decreasing the bulk density, and that's the only line there that was under 1. I'm happy to not sound like a cheerleader and give you the peer-reviewed versions of all of these, but it's there. And the next one. Okay. The other thing we've heard a lot about is contaminants in soil. And in fact, lead is a ubiquitous urban contaminant. And one of the things that I've done a lot of work on is how to make that lead less hazardous. I started doing this on Superfund sites and moved to urban gardens. And one of the things that we tested, and a lot of work on this has been done by Ganga Hederachi out of Kansas State, and she looked at urban gardens in Tacoma, Seattle, Kansas City, Indiana, all over the country. And what she's basically shown is that if you use compost, you can reduce the lead in the soil, you can reduce the concentrations, and you can also reduce concentrations of arsenic. You have very little plant uptake, and work that she and I have done have looked at the speciation of that lead. And in certain cases with the compost, you can change the form of the lead, and sorry that other picture isn't showing up here, but what you can do is make the lead less bioavailable. So if you do get exposed to the lead in the soil, it can't, it has much lower potential to cause harm. So next one. Okay, when you talk about productivity in urban soils, the difference is really astounding. This is soil in Tacoma. It's actually at the wastewater treatment plant. And that's soil on the side where you can barely spot the plants. That was soil from the areas around the plant. It was probably a subsoil that had been used during construction, put plenty of fertilizer down, and got very little return. On the other hand, here we use the biosolids-based soil product that's in Tacoma, provided to all community gardeners, as well as soil testing and access to water. And I can go into that in a bit here, and you can see the growth difference. It's pretty astounding. Okay. In a book that, 2-volume that Kristen contributed to on urban agriculture, one of the chapters that we had was written by the McGoodwin family, and they were hardcore community gardeners in Seattle. And what they used, the yard food waste compost that's available here, and they measured exactly by bunches of arugula how much they could get out of a community garden plot. And they found they got a food value of $4,436 per 600 square feet. Okay, there's an urban garden that you're going to see a picture of, a community garden in Tacoma, and that's part of their community garden program. Here again, Tacoma had a history of lead and arsenic contamination from a smelter that was in the city. And so people were terrified of their soil, and there have been a number of cases where excavation was done to remediate the soils. But as part of the community garden program there, all the soils are tested for lead and arsenic. All the soils are provided with cardboard moved from the solid waste stream to provide a barrier to the soil, with wood waste mulched and provided to these gardens as well to keep the weeds down on top of the cardboard. They're given the material to build raised beds, and they're given either a yard waste compost or the biosolids product to fill raised beds, access to water, and this all makes the community garden program successful and safe. And so if you look at that, if you go back for just a second, you can start doing calculations here on the value of compost and understanding what kind of value per ton that increased productivity will get you. I'm not going to dwell on that here. Next, I'm up to it. The other thing to understand, and this is really important for kids, disadvantaged people of all kinds, getting involved even in the making the compost process. And this is a school, Red Hook Community Garden in Brooklyn. New York City has a great program training people to compost. Composting changes the lives of the people that get involved. Just understanding the whole process of touching the soil and seeing growth is amazing. And the next slide. One of the areas that we have plots now is at, go back, okay, is at one of the local prisons. And they have a food waste diversion program there with worm composting. We're looking at the connection between soil health and plant health there, and seeing the impact that getting involved with growing food and making compost has had on the inmates. This is a link here to a fabulous story. Juan here has been a pleasure to work with, and this guy, his life has been changed by getting his hands in the dirt. So to summarize, last one. Okay, so you take this stuff that we've had the luxury of thinking is garbage for so many decades, and that's that Proctor garden there in the picture, and you take it out of that landfill. You get huge carbon credits for landfill avoidance. You get the carbon benefits for fertilizer replacement, soil carbon. You get safe soils. You get much more productive soils, and you get happier and healthier and better fed people. So this is such an easy solution that's so good for everybody. And please, please use this solution. And that's the end, even though I have other slides, that was supposed to be the end. So thank you. Thank you so much for everybody for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sally.